Well, hello, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives and undo the coup. That's my new saying. I hope you'll pass it along. Undo the coup, the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963. That's where we have been hijacked. Our country's been hijacked, and we need to let everybody know that we got to do something about it. And well, thank you for indulging me to push my latest campaign, Undo the Coup. David Cranmer Underdown. It's been about a month or so since I've had a chance to catch up with you, and a lot of stuff has happened. We're just down the street. We have a lady who raises peacocks, and I thought, well, let's talk about the peacock throne. How are you today?
Well, I'm doing well. It's hot and humid in Michigan today also, but it's all these topics are very interesting, and I love the topic of peacocks because um, the wealthy gentleman farmer family, the Johnsons from southern Indiana, had peacocks on their hunting property, and they were known as the wealthy family. And of course, that is the family that John Watson Foster, the Dulles brothers' grandfather, their grandmother is a Johnson of that Johnson farm that had the
Wow.
peacocks. Yeah. So,
Man, every time I talk to you, it blows
yeah,
my mind, man.
this is
That
why the
that is
Indiana is so
so
fun because
cool.
my grandpa's sister was also married to a Johnson. So that's how we heard the story about the peacocks and how they were the really wealthy family. But if you back it up, the original Johnson was the secretary for William Henry Harrison for the Northwest Territory. So he wrote a lot of the law that made the Northwest Territory. He worked on the Indiana, state constitution. So he was a big player. And of course, Sullivan and Cromwell, the Sullivan comes from Indiana. So there's a lot of history with Indiana law, and and with this topic, with the topic of coups, I love studying the coups, and that's the JFK assassination is one, but the all the coups are interesting, and I feel like we talk about them a lot, and I really look at the Eisenhower administration a lot because that's the new look, and that was John Foster Dulles, is Secretary of State. But the character that I feel like is historically left out, that's very important to me, is the Secretary of Defense, who was named Ensign Charlie Wilson, and he was the chairman of General Motors and DuPont during the war, which of course was the largest corporation in the world. He becomes Secretary of Defense, puts in the new look. So the operations like we're talking about, like Ajax in '53, the overthrow of Mossadegh, that's the same group, and so we can get into that.
Wow. Well, let's go back to Engine Charlie Wilson because he's not somebody most people know about, and he that was GM and DuPont were already merged by then.
They were merged by John Jacob Rascov, who I talk a lot about. He was the
Yeah.
secretary for Pierre DuPont. So when Pierre DuPont comes in and buys the majority shares of General Motors, it's Rascov that's the financial wizard, and he also happens to be the controller of the Knights of Malta. So that's another intrigue with General Motors, DuPont, and the Knights of Malta. The person that did the merger of GM and DuPont created DuPont Analysis that's used in finance historically, is John Jacob Rascov, who built the Empire State Building. And of course, his home in Delaware, in Claymont, Delaware, becomes the Archmere Academy, where our friends Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and Beau Biden all go to high school. So it's the Catholic school in Claymont. Archmere is on the old lands of John Jacob Rascov. And of course, his second vacation home in Pioneer Point is where the Mike Flynn trouble with the Russian retreat happens. If people remember, with Kislyak, and the Pioneer Point was at Rascov's home. So all these GM DuPont connections are really at the forefront for me.
Now you're talking about the Rascom home that we visited in 2019. I don't think you were with us, but that was our first McDuff charrette.
Yep.
And my wife Marcia put together a terrific program. We ended up renting a small boat to sail up the Chester River in order to get photographs and have an eyeball on the Raskob estate that was big in the news at that time. And of course, that was in 2019, July 20th, 2019. I know it because that was Marcy's birthday, and we spent it with the Ospreys, and the Osprey group continues to fly all around the world now. We've got Ospreys everywhere, and you, of course, are one of them. So back to Charlie Wilson, though, and GM. You know, I think of the Mossadegh coup as a coup primarily by BP, but coordinated by Kermit Roosevelt and the Americans. But I'm not sure why GM would be involved.
Why General Motors would be involved?
Yeah, why would Wilson?
Well, I mean, they did deals like in 31. They acquired Opel, which was the largest automotive company in all of Europe, and it had Opel Rack, which was the rocketry program that had Dornberger and the von Brauns, were all General Motors employees. So they were like Henry Ford. I mean, Ford gets a lot of attention for Ford Works and Ford Germany, but General Motors and these are industrial corporations. It's the largest corporation in the world, so they're involved in the international business. They're one of the leading corporations in the world.
Okay, so it's a worldwide venture.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a cabal of all the big corporations in the world?
No, I go to the specific characters. I mean, I look at Charles Kettering. Okay, Charles Kettering was from Dayton, Ohio. He worked for the National Cash Register, and then he started the Delco company. Delco was, Delco Radio was in Vigo Ordnance Factory when they're making anthrax during World War II.
Well, wait a minute. Go back to the Ordnance Factory.
Okay, so Vigo Ordnance Factory.
No. Wait. The one before that, where you mentioned that
Delco, the Dayton Radio or the Dayton Electric Company.
No, before that. What was the one before that?
National Cash Register.
Now, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, that is where James Jesus Angleton's father worked, right?
In Italy, though, he had the Italian franchise. This National Cash Register is in Dayton, Ohio, and it's Robert Patterson and the Patterson of Wright-Patterson Field, where the Dayton Accords were signed. That's the same Patterson Air Force Base. And, of course, that's also where, after World War II, a lot of the Wonder Weapon programs went to Wright-Patterson Base. And, of course, the commander of it was William Knutson, who was came up with the term arsenal of democracy, worked on Ford's assembly line in Highland Park. He was the head of mass production for General Motors during World War II, working with Bernard Baruch.
Slow down.
So this is General Motors. This is why GM is so important, because the person that was in charge of doing mass production in the arsenal of democracy was named William Knutson. That was the president of General Motors. And he worked with a man named Albert Kahn, who was building huge factories. So you had a 1-2 punch. You had Albert Kahn's brother doing reinforced concrete so they could build bigger, longer factories. You have William Knutson coming in doing the assembly line expert for mass production. Rosie the Riveter is the best icon of that, with the Rosie, making the B-24 bombers, 1 bomber an hour at the Willow Run factory. So that,
all right. Let me go back, because I'm trying to keep a few things in my mind to delve deeper into, but I can't keep up with all of those names. I love it. And don't get me wrong, but my limitation is I've got to stop you now and then, and I apologize.
Yeah, no, it's hard because the auto industry is so hard, because Henry Ford was made an icon of being anti-Semitic. So people associate everybody associated with Detroit and with having those tendencies. So it's a challenge, that Ford famously had the lawsuits in the 1920s over those issues. So it's a real part of the story.
But let's go back to GM.
Okay.
One of my footnotes that I finally retrieved was Werner von Braun worked for GM.
For Opel.
Okay, he worked for Opel in Germany. I didn't know that. And of course, Opel works for GM.
Well, Opel is owned by GM, and the person that went to Germany to meet with John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles and Hitler and all the, the Schroeder bankers was William Knudsen. He was from Buffalo, but he was a Danish guy and he spoke German. So he's the logical person that would go there. And again, I don't know if he was a Nazi or what, but he was the one that did that. And his grandson went to boarding school with my dad. So they were a nice family to my dad. And of course, his son, Bunky Knudsen, becomes the famous person fired by Henry Ford II to bring Lee Iacocca into the Ford Motor Company. So, that's intriguing because Robert McNamara, of course, was in that mix of characters also before he becomes the Secretary of Defense under Kennedy.
When President Roosevelt made his, what did he call that candidate? The cabinet, the dollar a year,
Wise
man,
Men.
it was.
They had the Wise Men. They had a group called Wise Men, and then I forget what did Roosevelt call it, the Wise Men? I forget what his group.
No, I'm not sure, but I think that there was something about dollar a year men that
Yeah, that was William Knudsen for sure. It was also Bernard Baruch.
And these guys were like supposedly a brain trust that was working for practically nothing. But in fact, who are they? But the champions of these corporate monsters that are conquering the world, right?
Well, George Herbert Walker, of the famous Brown Brothers Harriman and everything, was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in World War II, right after the war ended, under Knudsen. So there's a lot of crossover between the old skull and bones banks that people talk about. But again, we've got the Dulles brothers as the lawyers in the situation that become Secretary of Defense and the head of the CIA. So there's a lot of crossover between all these operations. Of course, Donovan, the founder of the OSS, he was a law student with Roosevelt at Columbia under Harlan Fiske Stone, that was their mentor at Columbia. And then he is a Sullivan and Cromwell lawyer as well. So that, there's a lot of crossover between all these characters.
Okay, so somehow between the British and these corporate American powers, a decision is made to take down Mossadegh. And the only thing that people generally know about is that he was going to nationalize the oil that was under their sand, and that pissed everybody off. So you want to fill in a little bit more about how the corporate and the individuals you speak of caused this revolution to happen, or coup?
Kind of a layered sequence that happens, because before there's the Operation FF, which was the overthrow in Egypt of King Farouk. And King Farouk, when he's overthrown the year before Ajax, his sister actually marries the Shah. So you have the old Egyptian wife, or the sister of the overthrown Egyptian King Farouk, who marries the Shah, and then Mossadegh is overthrown, and then the Shah is installed. But of course, the Shah also has the history with going to La Rosie, the private school in Switzerland, with Richard Helms. And Helms's his grandfather, William Magura, was the first president of the Bank of International Settlements. So there's a very
Richard Helms's grandfather was the first president of the BIS.
Yeah, William Gates Magura, the grandfather of Richard Helms, was the first president of the Bank of International Settlements.
And here I thought that this Richard Helms just kind of came from nowhere. Wow.
I think he's the one that beat up the Shah. So the Shah has a very interesting background. His father believed that any kind of love shown to a boy would turn him homosexual. So he was very fearful of that. So he had the wife and the sisters really raised the Shah. Then he goes to La Rosie, this elite private school in Switzerland. And in his freshman year, he gets beat up by an American, a tough American, kicks his ass. So my guess is that Richard Helms beat him up in high school. And it goes back that far. They definitely went to the same school, but it kind of makes sense when you get to the 70s, when Helms becomes the ambassador during the Iran-Contra affair, and he's sick with cancer, and they're flying him to MD Anderson and whatnot through Southern Air Transport. All those intrigues are layered in it as well, because, like I said, Helms is the guy, with the heart attack gun with Bill Barr sitting next to him and everything. And, again, like, is Bill Barr just a preppy guy in his rep tie and blue blazer, or is he, uh, performing as that for conservative people to think that he's a, conservative guy?
Every time I do a show with you, I think we gotta just transcribe this and make a book out of it. And I'm really feeling that right now. I keep learning things every sentence you give me, and I really enjoy it. Thank you. So the Peacock Throne, did it exist before the coup d'état that installed?
It's an old one. It's a 2,500-year-old claim. But the other personal connection that ties to Charles Wilson and to Charles Lindbergh that's very important is Lindbergh, if people remember, famously had his baby taken and murdered. And the person that did the investigation of that was Norman Schwarzkopf, Herbert Norman Schwarzkopf, the father of Stormin Norman from
Norman Norman.
So his dad was a New Jersey detective, and he led the investigation of the Lindbergh baby with Wild Bill Donovan, who was at Donovan and Leisure, his law firm at the time in New York. So they lead the investigation into the Lindbergh baby, and of course the murdered baby is terrible. So they go to Germany for a little bit, and then they come back and they move to Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, right, where they move into the house at Cranbrook, and it's Uncle Henry Booth that brings Anne Morrow and Charles Lindbergh to Cranbrook. What's he doing there? He's working at Willow Run for Henry and Edsel Ford, right? So who is the person that goes from the New Jersey detective to go to Iran that does the special forces for Ajax? It's Herbert Schwarzkopf. And what does he create? The SAVAK, the most savage, brutal, death squad, rumors of Otto Skorzeny himself training them as well. But officially, it is Schwarzkopf that trains them. And then who does SAVAK merge with in the 70s? The Safari Club, right? 5 intelligence agencies: France, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the SAVAK, which is Iranian, and France. So those were the 5. And then Henry Kissinger and George Bush are running this through proxy with Ted Shackley kind of as the main operator. And this is where you get into the Iran-Contra stuff with Singlaub and Oliver North. That's what feeds into that group. But that SAVAK goes all the way back to the Lindbergh baby, finding the baby with Schwarzkopf that later trains the SAVAK. And Lindbergh, of course, is also the anti-Semite with Ford in the same group, which was called the America First Committee, which was actually founded at Yale Law School by the Quaker Oats family. But the people in that original America First, before they recruited Ford and Lindbergh to be the spokesman for it, were people like Gerald Ford, who was a law student, and also Sergeant Shriver, the Kennedy connection, also in the America First at Yale. So a lot of cross signals on these things, because as I've told you, that my grandma, the one that died when my dad was a freshman, and mirrors kind of the story that I share with you with your dad's story. Well, she was the one that was friends with all these Booth and people, and she would have been hanging out with them. She was into that art community, and she's the one that was friends with all the the people that we talk about as far as the like the people that fixed up my mom and dad. That he was the chief chemist of Park Davis Pharmaceuticals, and of course that ties back to the Gibson Island, because the guy that started the Gibson Island conferences, Neil Gordon, became the chemist at Wayne State University, and the Harvey Merker joined him to start this Kresge Hooker Library at Wayne State, which is an old medical library. And of course, AZT, the AIDS drug, is synthesized at Wayne State through the Peter Carmano's Cancer Institute, and then it gets into all the Wellcome Trust and all the stuff with the 80s and all the AIDS stuff later. But it was Wayne State was where that originated. And of course, Park Davis also has all the Salk history. Jonas Salk was working at University of Michigan and working with Park Davis, and they were one of the original polio vaccine, characters. And of course, when Salk goes to San Diego, it's the Scripps family that, the land for the Scripps Institute is, or sorry, the Salk is Scripps family. So it's the same, Cranbrook family that's involved in that aspect as well.
You mentioned America First. I was just starting to study. I haven't done much yet, but the historian Charles Beard wrote a famous book that was published in 1940, and the title was America First. And it's this idea of America First really is the idea that we talk about with Anton Chaikin and Harley Schlanger and other folks who are about sovereignty, about American sovereignty being eroded. And that's of course what's Undo the Coup is all about, is to restore our sovereignty and to reclaim the rights of common people, of we the people, to control what our nation does. Well, these America First people are entwined with the corporate people, which I never really thought of that. What you've indicated is that we have America First people who are part of running these coups. And so I see when the CIA comes in and is supporting, takedowns of foreign governments, this one in particular, these are often people with the morality of America First, and not necessarily part of a global corporate conspiracy to, which I think is a British idea of we will be the center of a financial empire that will control the economy of the entire world. This technocracy that we always talk about is descending upon us with satellites and 5G and you name it. Vaccination as part of it. I tend to think of there being two sides of the technocracy side with the Masons and the pyramids and all of that stuff, but then the America First side with Douglas MacArthur and the tradition of our military to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. That, I think, is the distinction I'm trying to make, is that there are some people out there that are trying to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution according to the oaths that they took. And there are some people out there that are acting as if the Constitution doesn't mean a damn thing to them, and they're just going full speed ahead, building their own personal empires and oligarchies. How do you react to that? Do you see a dichotomy there, or is it all just all blended together in a mixture of individual agendas and overall imperial control from the top?
Well, I look at the unifying factor, and it's anti-communism to me. And the World Anti-Communism League is one of the major places where you get Charles Willoughby, who was the intelligence officer for MacArthur, with Chiang Kai-shek. So now you're into the history of the KMT and Chiang Kai-shek and Sun Yat-sen, and now you have the Charlie Sung story where he's the Bible salesman in North Carolina. He gets funded by Julian Carr for the Boxer Rebellion. So what it seemed like to me is that all the groups after World War II, instead of promoting the Constitution, as you suggested, decided the doctrine is defeat communism. No matter what the goal is, defeat communism, any tactics, it doesn't matter, secret, sandbagging tactics, trickery, hook or crook. Communism is the problem. And as long as you're defeating communism, anything you do is justified. And to me, it's just a very kind of Calvinistic, predetermined kind of viewpoint where, what you do doesn't really have effect, and or it doesn't matter, and that you're already kind of picked. So that's how I see it, and I feel like the World Anti-Communist League then sort of folds into the Western goals, and then you get just an odd mix of characters. Like Roy Cohn is in there, and you've got Singlaub, who has this Air Force, career and is working with Oliver North. You've got Stefan Halper as the banker that's reintroduced in Crossfire Hurricane as the FBI informant. It's just like a long mix of, just like, I guess my overall thing is I agree with what you're saying. I think that the idea that defeating communism is almost like a religion is kind of the wiring of kind of the Steve Bannon crowd, the
How can
American.
they not see through that? I mean,
I
you
don't
see
know.
through
I
it.
mean,
I
people
see
love
through
the
it.
barber. I
It's
love the
just
barber. I love the barber coat. I love the hunter boots. I love the whole sportsman look, like the town and country thing. Like, I mean, I'm into the tweed blazers and everything. Like, I'm with him with the whole look, but it's a show. I mean, you have to remember that he was the naval liaison during Operation Cyclone, which was the formation of the Mujahideen with Brzezinski. He's the naval liaison. It's the same time that John McCain is the naval liaison to the Senate with James Jones as his assistant. So, that's one of the reports that George Webb made today about what Trump said was talking about how he feels like Trump is now taking the position of the referee, and that he's the referee, and it's Iran versus Israel, and he's going to let them fight it out, but he's going to be like a WWF referee, where if he thinks something is really getting out of line, he's going to come in and clock the guy and decide the fight as sort of the arbitrator in sort of a wrestling format. And the reason why I really buy into that, of course, is because at the convention, Hulk Hogan was one of the featured speakers, and Peter Thiel, of course, saved Hulk Hogan when he had his, sex tape leaks and all that. Like, he gave him the $10 million to defend him, and then Hulkster becomes this, iconic hero in the '80s for kind of Americana in wrestling, and his chief rival is the Iron Sheik. The Iron Sheik was formerly a Iranian Guard member before the overthrow. So you bring this special forces guy to become a showman wrestler that gets into a food fight with Hulk Hogan, and it becomes part of the culture of the '80s. And people like Steve Bannon that love all the action movies and all the Rockies and Rambos and wrestling and pro football and all that, that's the crowd that really gets behind it. Like, I've got the job site next to my house, and the workmen are, talking loud, like at the job site, and they're talking about, oh, we're going to, bomb them. And yeah, bring it on, bring it on, bring it on. They got nukes. We got them too. Bring it on. Like, they have that mentality, and they, I felt like they were just, chatting on the job site, and that's how they really felt about the matter.
Well, I certainly agree with Trump posturing himself as a referee. Of course, that's very nice position to be in, as opposed to having to be one of the fighters. And if you can accomplish that, fabulous. But and right now, I mean, I'm like, maybe bombing those facilities was a good thing. I know a lot of people were like, yeah, go ahead, bomb Iran. Well, to me, it's like a violation of the Constitution. So we shouldn't do that, But on the other hand, the Constitution's been violated at least since November of 1963, when the government fell, and the new behind the scenes committee run government that pulls the puppet strings, as we refer to our friend Andrew Craig's book, Presidential Puppetry, which documents the whole thing. So we have this situation now where, no, we don't have a constitutional government. No, the people are not empowered. Yes, the financial powers and the powers of foreign governments have invaded our country and invaded our Congress and invaded our executive departments. And now we are just being drawn into this worldwide corporate milieu in which nobody has a power to control anything except for the very few elites at the very top. And the oligarchs that get their fiefdoms, you can have this part of Ukraine, you can have Ohio, and we're going to give Alberta to this guy, and we're going to let you have, Saskatchewan, and somebody else gets the southern tip of Argentina, or I mean, just doling it out like the British Empire did. Uh, in other words, we are becoming Great Britain again without noticing it. And unless we do things like go back and really unwrap the JFK coup. So I mean, I don't know. What do you think, David? What if you were able to stand on a soapbox and tell American people, here's what we need to do? What do you think we should do?
I mean, I think education is the key. I mean, my thing is trying to lay out events in a way that's more like logical and easy to understand and with character indexes so you know who the people are and you're not constantly having unfamiliar people that you're told what their nature and their role is when it may not be. So that's to me what my main thing is trying to do network analysis and sort of create a thread that's easier to follow. Because I think of it like an investigation, like the who, what, when, where, how, and why. And the why is is usually the hardest in the investigation. And I think you outlined it, the carving up the globe and having control of energy resources, mineral resources, different areas, but also the ability to move it around is critical. And that's the Belt and Road. The Belt and Road is the rail and sea shipping lanes, and of course the air routes are complicate the matters, but controlling where things are. And again, like if you're doing this from a wargaming strategy, you want to have the get the most bang for your buck without having to manage things. Like that's why you want to use proxies and have the like what we just described, the referee. You want to be the referee and have the other guys fight. I mean, you talked about your mom, whatever, teaching you that as a little kid. If somebody's trying to get you to be the fighter, think about it.
Yeah.
To figure out why are they doing that, like why are they using me to do that, and do I want to be involved in it? And and that becomes a part of the problem, is that the public relations surrounding these events is good cop, not just bad guy, but like terrible, like dictator, cruel tyrant that we need to stop. And that's part of it is that's why I like to look at the families of all the people, because like the Shaw's sister was meeting with Kim Roosevelt in Paris and taking the furs and the diamonds, and then she's in the banking deals with Adnan Khashoggi later. After her brother's dead, she's doing the Hong Kong bank and deposit with Adnan Khashoggi and Roy Furmark, who is the longtime associate with Bill Casey, going back to the Point Four program with Clark Clifford. Again, like going all the way back to the Eisenhower the Truman administration. And then Clifford becomes the fall guy for BCCI in the 80s. It's the same people over and over again. So for me, my soapbox is I try to write stories that the characters are memorable and the events are memorable. And, I come up with creative devices like BS detectors that people can use to listen to scenarios and then kind of stress test them and see if they're if the stories hold up or if they're suspicious and fishy. And so that's what I try to do, because I feel like in general most people get along, and if you don't get along with somebody, you can find a way to avoid them, or there's not a aggressive attack or whatever. And that the leaders should try to think of ways to you know, uh, have people work together, and the people that can't get along no matter what, think of ways that they can be separated where they don't, hold huge grudges going forward. So that would be my advice. I mean, as far as the specifics, it's a lot of, showmanship as far as like what we were, describing with Trump and the dropping F bombs in the Rose Garden. And, Melania bulldozing Jackie Kennedy's Rose Garden. Like all those things are, just little, things to poke people that are sensitive to that stuff, to destabilize them and make it so they can't think straight. And it's just crummy tactics. And, my, what I would advise is to, try to learn the networks, learn the coups. I mean, the JFK one is obviously very important, but the characters in that are involved in, JM Wave, which is the Miami field station that did like the PB Success, which was the Guatemalan overthrow. There's a lot of crossover of the characters over and over again. So if people get really familiar with them, that's what I try to do, is write stories where the same characters, you get familiar with the people, and then it's not, just like pulling people out and you don't know what their background is and or why they're, important.
You're writing stories and making character references, and I'm not seeing that. Where are you? Are you
I
talking
just
about
post them on my Twitter feed. They're
your
just
Twitter feed?
Grok. I just write them in Grok, so they're just sort of like assisted with Grok, where I am doing post training of Grok, where I will, add historical information, and then add a lot of things like roles and relationships that maybe like Wikipedia doesn't contain, or they don't link it, and then I'll try to link that, and then drawing off that database of information, writing stories, kind of taking the big mess of information and then laying it out in a thread and then telling the story based on the thread is kind of the idea that I'm trying to do.
Yeah, so I got to get your threads get one of those thread unrolls.
No, you don't have to do that. You can just go. I think you can just go on it. If you click on it, I think you can just read the whole thing.
Well, that's
They're
true.
long, but the idea of it is that people can take that and use them. Like if they like the training, they can just copy and paste it and use it for their own things. Because again, like my thing is open source. Let people use their own instincts and like, friend and foe recognition. Like, does it feel right or not? Like, I feel like people have good instincts and judgments if they have the right, good information they're confident in. But if they're constantly feel like they don't know what's going on or they don't know, then they just get fed down the path of, do I like this personality and associate with them, or this one, and they don't like each other. So I, like all the people that like this character and I don't like the ones that like this character. And it just turns into a food fight where nothing moves forward.
Focusing on the people, their families, their connections, and their characters. That's great. I love it. I don't. I look at the big, to me, I'm more concerned about Elon Musk's satellites, than I am about his personality. I am concerned that for whatever reason, he's installing a system that's going to be able to surveil us, and if not, zap us with something, uh, and there will be nothing we can do about it. We're turning the world into a vast panopticon. I don't. Most people, I think, on the mega scale are sensitive to this, and it reminds me of the fact that I'm still grateful that President Trump is the president and not Kamala Harris, because we don't have mandatory injections. We don't have to bend over and roll up our sleeves at command, and we're starting to get a sense of cleaning up the judiciary. Things that help us in our daily lives. So if we have to choose between, was the quote from Master and Commander, the movie, which Weevil would you pick? And Stephen picks the larger Weevil, and then Captain Aubrey tells him, oh, no. In the British Navy, you must always choose the lesser Weevil.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're doing. We're just going through life saying, oh, well, okay, that one, like some people are saying, oh, Orange Man is the worst evil, so I'll pick the other one. And then other people are saying, no, Biden and Kamala, they're the worst evil, so I'm picking Orange Man. And that's how our politics has been run. And it's just when do people wake up and say, "Hey, I'm supposed to be part of this"? I mean, this is American. The government's the document says that it's founded by the people for the people, and that we are in charge ultimately. But no, we're not in charge. We just get to choose between two uh, um, puppets. Uh, I I see the value of all of these personalities and these connections, and how all of these things are tied together by wealthy families going back, into the opium traders, and of course before that. But um, the morality of it doesn't seem to be important enough for the American people to rise up. It's just like, oh, uh, that money came from murdering 20 million Chinese people in the 1800s with opium, or that money comes from fentanyl, or these the Pritzkers, or the families that are obviously running making money from the dark economy. Uh, so those are the things that I think we need to face up to, and that's what I think that President Kennedy at least kept in mind the idea that this is supposedly a constitutional republic, and because of his dedication to that, that's why he had to be killed. Because the people that are really running things don't give a damn about what the Constitution says when it conflicts with their interest, and that's why I think it's a shame that President Trump couldn't have gotten Congress to pass a resolution to allow that bombing instead of just going out and doing it.
Well, I agree. I mean, I look at things like the Iran nuclear deal and the IP3, the history of that, and then also the Operation Olympic Games, where they did the Stuxnet attacks, the computer attacks on the same nuclear facilities. So these things have been, attacked covertly before. So I don't see that necessarily as a Trump thing. I feel like it's just kind of the standard. Um, in that
Well,
in
Israel has done it before, but we never did it as a American venture. It
well,
was
for the bombing, but they did cyber attacks. They did that was James Cartwright that led
okay.
the cyber attacks on that where they spun the Siemens controllers, and they ruined the centrifuges in Iran. Because again, like the whole talk is, well, does Iran have the nuclear bomb, and or not? That becomes the debate. Well, are we going to mention that Mark Rich built a pipeline through Iran to Israel, and he was dealing, and nobody knows who the Rodney Fisk is. It did megatons to megawatts, the mysterious South African mystery man that brokered the nuclear material from the end of the Cold War. That's an interesting thing to not know that man. It's crazy. So those are all part of it, and the character part is. The reason I do the characters is I'm modeling like the Henry Murray that did the psychological profile of Hitler, and also Carl Jung did it, and this is what developed into the Andrew Marshall's Office of Net Assessment. So when I'm doing personality profiles, it's not because I care whether they're a nice guy or I'm drawn to their personality. It's to war game it, to decide this is their drives, this is their interests, this is the way that you could most successfully have a successful negotiation with them based on their temperament and their pattern. And that's what I use it for, is for learning and trying to have successful outcomes that are streamlined, and not getting into the personality fights, because again, people love that stuff. I mean, like I told you the story about going to Michigan Stadium as a 3-year-old, and the band comes out and the stadium's going crazy. The allure of the crowd, and the our guys going against the guys coming into our arena, and this is our house, and we're gonna kick their butt, and our band's better too. Like that is all part of the uh, framework that we're inundated with, when in reality these interactions are multifaceted with more than just two partners involved. I mean, we just talked about it. I mean, Iran, the British Petroleum Company, was originally the Anglo-Persian petroleum company. Persia was the name of Iran before Iran. So British Petroleum and Churchill, being the naval secretary, the mirrored position to FDR, putting the Royal Navy on petroleum through BP, the Reuter concession. I mean, going all the way back to the Reuter concession. These are all parts of the history of this Iran in the region. And, Reuter has the interest because he became a, wire service tycoon. Reuters and AP and UPI are kind of the big wire services. And he was set up across from the Royal Exchange. So very old connections to the city of London for Reuter, even though he's a German guy. But these are all parts of the framework of Iran.
What was Reuters' connection to BP?
Well, Reuter was earlier. In like 1870, he got the concession for all the minerals and all the right-of-ways for their railroads and their telegraphs. And he basically, that it was the, if it was Trump saying it was the worst deal, he signed the worst deal ever, and that Reuter just robbed him, and Iran was all pissed about it. I mean, this became the Baghdad to Berlin railroad story from World War I is also part of this, but that was a deal where Reuter had more modern techniques for oil discovery. And, these were all new things in that era. Like petroleum was just becoming a thing. And they were able to make a deal where the Persians didn't know the value of that. So there was a lot of fighting over whether that concession was, an international legal treaty. But they said it became the basis for the foreign intervention as far as going into foreign lands and not taking like the East India model, but using the more modern banking techniques for financing railroads and right-of-ways for telegraph lines and controlling communications and signal comms and those are all things that were part of that deal. So that all is part of the Shah and the Peacock Throne story, because they were the royal family in the region. So this is all really old history, and it's why the kind of the WWF kind of gamesmanship that we're getting right now is just for me. It's just hard to watch because I'm not drawn to that kind of a show at all. So but that's what we get.
Well, let's get back to the Peacock Throne for a couple of minutes now. The powers that be, BP and Kermit Roosevelt and the rest ran the coup, got rid of Mossadegh, and installed the Shah, Reza Pahlavi, and everything seemed to be fine. What then along comes the revolution, the Iranian Revolution. What were the powers behind the scenes that, I mean, I don't think it was just a bunch of Iranian students getting mad. What were the powers behind the scenes that decided to dethrone Pahlavi?
Well, I was actually working on this before, and there was a white revolution, I believe, was in the 60s that Revi installed in Iran, and that drew a lot of the concepts that were from a lot of the previous coups. But as far as the hostages and the Operation Cyclone and sort of the end of his reign, from what I understand, he was very sick with cancer, and that became a big issue for him.
Yeah.
And he was dealing with that and, flying. And this is where the Intertel, which was the Resorts International's, private security service, they were flying him on the Southern Air planes. And of course, Southern Air later becomes the Les Wexner. But the person that buys Resorts International is Donald Trump. And that's the Intertel, their private security service, was involved in the Watergate with the Robert Mullen Company, which was the William Bennett's private security firm, who later becomes the senator. but they were both working for Howard Hughes and Howard Hughes Summa. And that goes back to, again, to the previous revolution, because now you've got the Hughes, bringing in the, the mafia guys for the Operation uh, Mongoose, where the
Yeah.
Mayhew is the lawyer, and he's working with the mafia guys and with Bill Harvey and Lansdale to do this operation. So that's.
So I think I'm getting the feeling that this is as I thought at the beginning that it was a British operation, and that who was was it Khomeini? What was the name of the Ayatollah?
Ayatollah Khomeini, yeah, he comes in, but he does the petroleum deal with Mark Rich at the same time. So it's kind of like, well,
okay.
yeah.
Well, let me finish my point though. It looks like the Pahlavi connection to the America First side of the world economy, going to Howard Hughes, for instance, through the route, connections you just named, indicates that perhaps the way the government was being run wasn't to the to BP's pleasure as much as it was working with people like Nixon and that side of American wealth. Whereas the British would have had the interest to, get rid of him if he's now no longer their puppet, but has become entwined with an American power structure that is threatening, to take the money away from the British. Does that make sense? In
It
other words,
does. I mean, because I think that it was a joint venture, but again, like in the way I analyze all these things, I think of British intelligence and American intelligence as the same, and they were part of the British security coordination during World War II under Stevenson and Donovan, and they were headquartered in Rockefeller Center. So they were doing operations during World War II together, and to me, they just sort of continued that, and then they had Henry Kissinger just sort of become the figurehead leader of it. I mean, but this is the Safari Club, because this is, again, you're bringing in the SAVIC in Safari Club. You're creating the BCCI, which is Bank of America, and the, Abu Dhabi Bank, the Dubai. So you have all these like old connections in Safari Club where they're running these operations, and it's, again, the same people. I mean, Bush becomes CIA director in '76. Shackley's deputy director. So it's, you had the Task Force 157 with Kissinger, with the naval group going to China. Like, to me, it's all the same group, and that it's the secret team model that Fletcher Prouty talks about. But it is, is it American? Is it British? Like, I think of it as international, intelligence organizations like the Safari Club, which to me was just the new name for the World Wildlife Fund. They just, instead of being the Chi-Chi the panda, now we're a Safari Club instead at the, at old our buddy Louis Mountbatten's sister-in-law's Safari Ranch that Adnan Khashoggi buys from Louis Mountbatten's sister-in-law. So it's, to me, the same families, because Louis Mountbatten was he was the commander of the British Navy in World War II. He was deeply involved with all the Flying Tigers and the opium business. But that's where I see the connection is with Kissinger and with Louis Mountbatten and the World Wildlife Fund, which was Prince Bernard and Prince Philip. Those are the people that I see are really running this, because the BCCI bank sort of became their, off books bank that they were running until they collapsed that, and then, merge or have it, rebranded as like HSBC or whatnot, or Apollo, but the characters are the same. So like, that's what, and again, the Shah's sister becomes the broker of the family fortune with Adnan Khashoggi. So again, it's like it's the same. It's the same group, like, working together, and you have the, this is where the Netanyahu relationship with like Fred Trump and with Mitt Romney at Boston Consulting Group. Like, these characters are all old connections going back to the 70s. So it's the same characters. They're just sort of reframed as different. You know, Trump is the president now, and he's somehow so powerful he's able to, get this referee position, which is incredible. I'm going to get Bo. I'm sorry. He's going
Sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, we love Bo. He wanted to say something. What's on your mind, Bo? What did Bo have some comments he wanted to make?
Bo had a great trip to Indiana. The people in Bloomington love Bo so much, more than any place I've ever gone. They're dog lovers there. So he had a great trip in Indiana, and he loved going around the IU campus, which is incredible. It's a beautiful, beautiful campus, and I highly recommend people go there.
Bloomington. I'd love to get up there, and maybe I'll see you there someday.
Well,
I'm so glad that Bo had a good trip. He's had a rough time for a while, but it sounds like he's in good spirits. There he is.
Yep, he's doing pretty good. He's had some health problems, but right now he's doing great. So
fabulous.
Yep.
All right. Well, we're heading up towards the noon hour, David. It's been another really educational and really fun, enjoyable conversation. And your stories that you write are on X, right under your name, David Cranmer Underdown. So folks, check them out. I'm going to give a plug for a new series that it's not new to the internet, but it's new to me. It's called Eyes Wide Open. And when you talk about things like the JM Wave and the 40 Committee and all that, and these connections to Howard Hughes and all of these things, this person is doing a fabulous job of putting all those stories together with appropriate graphics. And I thought I'd give him a plug. It's called Eyes Wide Open, and he's on YouTube. So check that out. It's right down your alley, David.
All right, I got to check it out. I'm not familiar with it.
All right, everybody. Thank you again for being with us. Remember, undo the coup, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, David. Bye, everybody.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.